began when I was 12. My mother had dragged me to a youth event organized by my church. When I got there, the people running it decided they wanted me to recite something. I tried telling them that I didn't want to, that I don't like public speaking. They didn't listen. I sat in the cafeteria, shaking, as more and more people filed in. Nobody noticed that I was upset. I'd had stage fright before, but this was not stage fright. The walls began to close in on me. My throat seized up. I couldn't breathe anymore. I ran outside and stood in the parking lot, sobbing for an hour. At the time, the church ladies called it an embarrassment to my mother. But that was my first panic attack. That began my relationship with my mental illness. At some point, I began calling it the void, because that is what it felt like, a void consuming me. It predates my current friendships. It has outlasted my romantic relationships. It is a relationship that has only gotten deeper and more intense with time. I had my first flashback at 14. At 15, I had my first attempt. So hi, my name is Rebecca Duras, and I have it on good authority that I am unhinged. Of course, that is a nice way of putting it. I've also heard that I'm useless, broken, dramatic, just looking for attention, and selfish. I've heard this from high school teachers, women from my church, people I considered friends, and my father. I was formally diagnosed with PTSD, depression, and anxiety at the age of 16. It's a fun little cocktail. Getting diagnosed was not my choice. I was forced to go see a therapist by my wrestling coach. I was at practice, and I had a flashback, and just stood by the side of the room, crying, waiting for it to pass. He came over and asked me what was wrong. I looked at him and said, "Oh, it's okay. I just cry a lot. This is normal." And he looked at me. He said, "This is not normal. You need help before this ruins your future. I'm going to have to report this." In the moment, I hated him. I thought I had it under control. Nobody else needed to interfere. But once my fury burned out, I realized how much tension was gone from my body. It was relieving to be able to admit that I was not okay, to have a name for what was wrong with me. See, deep down, I had been worried that maybe I was just dramatic and selfish. Of course, not everybody was ready for me to share my relief. There was one incident that stuck with me. I was telling my mother about the first boy that was ever interested in me. We were lying on my bed. I was telling her I had plans for the next week. It was going to be my first ever date. She said, "Just don't tell him about the thing." What thing? I was confused because my family, we have an above average number of skeletons in our closet. She said, "Don't tell him about the therapy." Little did my mother know, me and said boy had bonded over the fact that we were both suicidal wrecks. She said that because she wanted to protect me. But I thought, what if my mother was ashamed of me? And did this mean that nobody would ever love me once they found out who I really was. So I resigned myself to being lonely for the rest of my life. I was upfront with people about my mental illness. I saw it as a way of weeding out the people who didn't matter before I wasted any time on them. I was frightfully open about my pain because I was angry. I was angry at everybody that cared more about reputation than about me getting help. I was angry at everybody that had not cared that I was struggling as long as my grades were good. Every time I told somebody that I was depressed or had a panic attack, I saw that as a middle finger to those people. The thing about anger and spite is they kept me warm for a while, but left me lonely. I spent all of my social interactions just waiting to be angry. I would jump at people for an ignorant comment or if I misinterpreted what they had said. I was afraid of being alone. In the end, I was alone. All I had was the void. Well, if me and the void were going to cohabit, I figured I might as well learn something about it. Researching mental illness became my hobby. Mostly, I wanted to know, why me? So I began Googling things like, is it normal to stop breathing when you walk into a crowded room? And why do I cry all the time? The first thing I found was the chemical imbalance theory. This theory says that mental illness is caused by the brain not producing the right kinds of neurotransmitters. I like this theory. Mental illness was genetic, so one more thing I could blame on my parents. It was biological, so even though there was something fundamentally wrong with me, it was out of my control. It wasn't my fault, but I could fix it. My therapist shot down this nice, comfy view of mental illness real quick. She said, mental illness is caused by a variety of factors, most of which are social, not biological. Uh-oh. See, I had thought I would just get a bottle of pills and I'd be better. I am on medication for my anxiety, and it has made my life so much easier. It's not enough. If mental illness is caused by social factors, then healing meant I had to address those factors. I had to acknowledge the traumas I had been carrying around with me my whole life. I had to look deep inside myself. I don't know about you all. Sometimes I don't want to look deep inside myself. There's some nasty stuff down there. But this social conception of mental illness can reframe the way we talk about mental health completely. Conditions such as depression and anxiety aren't diseases. They're normal responses to abnormal stresses. People with those conditions aren't sick or broken. We're normal people trying to deal with bad circumstances the best way that we can. Now, I wish I had a cool story about when I moved from spite to acceptance, but I don't. I can't even pinpoint that moment. I just know it came around this time I learned about the social factors behind mental illness. I stopped looking for something easy to blame. More importantly, I stopped blaming myself. My self-acceptance also came at the same time I realized I would never be fixed. See, for a long time, I held out hope that I would wake up one day and boom, no anxiety or depression. I realized I would be living with those conditions for the rest of my life. I said earlier my relationship with the void has outlasted my previous romantic relationships. Well, if I meet the love of my life tonight, and if you're out there, come say hi. And we stay together until the day that I die, my relationship with the void will still be longer. We've developed an uneasy collaboration, like two passive-aggressive roommates. I've accepted that it is as much a part of me as the fact that I am short and inherited my mother's bumpy nose. While I was preparing for this talk, I found a quote by the poet Orson Shire on Twitter, proving that procrastination is sometimes very good for you. She said, "Not everyone is okay with living like an open wound. But the thing about open wounds is, you're not ignoring it. You're healing. The fresh air can get to it. Living with my wounds open to the world has been frightening. But I've noticed that by spending less energy on hiding, I have so much more for healing. Being honest with myself has made me kinder to myself. I accept that I will have sad days instead of wallowing in self-loathing when they happen. I leave triggering situations instead of powering through for the sake of appearing normal. I've gotten so much healthier just in the past few years. And being open about my own struggles has had a funny side effect. Other people are more likely to come to me with their own pain. I guess there's less fear of judgment from someone who is as openly a mess as I am. Those of you who have been involved with the Middlebury community for some time are probably familiar with the Middlebury fine. You know, you see a friend, you ask each other how you are, and you both say fine, even though you're both disasters. This is by no means an exclusively Middlebury phenomenon. We live in a society that prizes competition and perfection, or at least the illusion of perfection. What this creates is, if you will excuse a semi-vulgar metaphor, is a society of emotionally constipated individuals. See, most people have not been forced to deal with uncomfortable truths about themselves early on. They've spent their whole lives cultivating this public persona. When they are faced with a strong negative emotion or an uncomfortable self-realization, they don't know what to do with it. They're afraid to admit this perceived weakness to themselves or to anybody else, so they don't release it in a healthy way. They hold it in. Too many people are more afraid of judgment than of living life as a lie. I wish I could say I am no longer afraid of judgment. Truth is, I am a lifelong type A control freak. Having this aspect of myself so far outside of my own control has been terrifying. I almost did not participate in the speaker competition because I was afraid of winning. I am afraid of acquaintances coming to this talk and learning more about me in 20 minutes than they have in 3 years. I am afraid of how my family will react when I send them a recording of this talk, if I send them a recording. I'm afraid of potential employers finding this online and deciding my mental illness makes me a liability. The morning of the speaker competition, I was still debating whether or not to participate. I saw a first year that I had mentored through First at Mid in the dining hall. During our conversation, they mentioned something their therapist had told them, and they paused. The look of relief on their face when I said I also go to therapy was immense. They told me they were afraid that I would be one of those people that looks at them funny when they say they are in therapy. That upset me more than I thought it would. I am supposed to be a trusted mentor to this first year, someone they can turn to with their problems without fear of judgment. And they were afraid to tell me about therapy. I decided to go through with this talk in the hopes that I can open up a new conversation about mental health, at least here at Middlebury. Sometimes I like to imagine a different world where the conversation around mental health is completely different. One where those of us with mental health conditions are treated with respect, not disdain. One where our communities embrace us, not isolate us. I wonder how that incident in the church would have played through in that world. People would have listened when I said I didn't want to speak. If I'd had a panic attack anyway, somebody would have helped me calm down. Maybe a church lady would have shared her own experiences with anxiety to show me that I was not alone. Church would have been a place of community and of healing, not a place of judgment I still avoid nearly a decade later. Nobody would have called me an embarrassment. Now, we as a community can do a lot of things. We can be supportive mentors to younger peers. We can advocate for mental health awareness. Those without mental health conditions can do their best to understand without offering judgment. But we can't change the past, nor do I think I want to. My mental health journey has made me stronger and more confident. I titled this talk, "The Void and Other Love Stories," because for the longest time, I thought my relationship with my mental illness would define me. It was so important to me, I even gave it a nickname. But through my relationship with my mental illness, I've deepened my knowledge of myself. I've grown to love myself. And in the end, it is my love story with myself that will be the longest and most important one of my life. Thank you.